Imagine for a second being the ultimate founding father of democracy.
Right, like the absolute visionary who takes a scattered, warring group of tribes and unites them.
Exactly. You bring them under a single constitution. You establish the rule of law. You invent the very concept of a commonwealth.
And you actually voluntarily give up your own absolute power to give the government back to the people.
Yeah, you are the ultimate civic hero. But if we look at your actual unfiltered life story.
Which is pretty intense.
Oh, it's wild. It involves so much kidnapping, like raw street violence, dark magic, and this rampant abuse of power.
So much abuse of power, yeah.
To the point that your own citizens eventually censor your history, overthrow you with a populist demagogue, and, have you thrown off a rocky cliff to your death.
It really is the ultimate paradox of legacy, isn't it?
It really is.
I mean, it's the history we're told versus the history that, well, that had to happen to build the world we live in.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking you into an incredibly rich and frankly shocking ancient biographical account that tries to untangle exactly that paradox.
We're looking at the life of the legendary founder of Athens, Theseus.
But we aren't just reading the myth here. We are looking at a brilliant ancient text that explicitly compares Theseus to Romulus, the founder of Rome.
Right. And our mission today is to explore that hazy, highly contested border where historical fact just kind of dissolves into poetic myth.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that border is exactly where empires are born, right?
Exactly. What we are going to unpack today is the actual mechanism of ancient PR.
Yeah.
We're going to critically evaluate how playwrights and politicians manipulated the public image of their leaders.
We'll examine the brutal morality of their violence, too.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we're going to explore what the concept of founding power actually requires.
And to really set the stage for this, the author of our source text starts with an analogy that is just, well, it's profoundly insightful.
Yeah, he compares the work of a historian to the work of an ancient geographer.
Right. He points out that when geographers are drawing maps of the world and they reach the absolute edge of their geographic knowledge.
Like the limits of where they've actually traveled.
Exactly. They don't just leave the paper blank. They fill the margins with these, terrifying disclaimers.
They write things like, "Beyond this lie sandy deserts full of wild beasts."
Or unapproachable bogs. Or a freezing sea.
It's the ancient equivalent of drawing a sea monster and writing, "Here be dragons."
Yes. And our author is basically admitting that time works the exact same way as geography.
He says that he's been writing histories of more recent figures where, as he puts it, probable reasoning can reach to and real history find a footing in.
Meaning he has reliable primary sources, right? Documented timelines.
Verifiable facts, yeah. But to tell the story of the founder of Athens, he has to travel so far back in time that he's stepping off the edge of the historical map.
He literally writes, "Beyond this, there is nothing but prodigies and fictions. The only inhabitants are the poets and inventors of fables."
Which is a remarkable level of, methodological transparency for an ancient writer.
It really is. He is telling you, the reader, that we are entering a zone of extreme historiographical instability.
But he feels compelled to go there anyway.
Right. And why? Because he just finished writing the biography of Romulus.
And when he looked at the sheer, terrifying magnitude of the man who founded Rome, he asked himself, who can I possibly set up to face him?
Who is his equal? And his answer is the man who populated the beautiful and far-famed city of Athens.
Theseus. And the text wastes absolutely no time drawing the parallels between the two.
Teseo y Romulo, right. They are inextricably linked in this account.
And if you look at the specific traits they share, the symmetry is intense.
Let's list them. Both were born out of wedlock with uncertain parentage.
Yep. Both carry the reputation of being sprung directly from the gods.
Right. Both were renowned warriors who combined immense physical strength with high-level strategic intelligence.
Both founded the world's two most famous cities, Rome and Athens.
Both of them stand charged with the abduction of women.
Lots of abductions. And, perhaps most surprisingly, for figures of this stature, neither could avoid terrible domestic misfortunes.
And both died deeply hated by the very people they led.
It is a striking list of shared characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
But let me stop you right there because I have to push back on this a little.
Yeah.
Looking at that list, it feels a little too perfect, It's highly suspicious.
It is very neat.
It almost feels like the ancient world had a strict pre-approved template for what a founder's resume had to look like.
Right, like if you want to be taken seriously as an empire builder, you need a divine dad.
A scandalous birth, some light kidnapping, and a tragic, violent end.
Exactly.
So are we supposed to believe they actually lived identical lives, or is this like a psychological framework that societies force onto their founders after the fact?
And that is the pivotal question of this entire text. And to answer it, we really have to deeply understand the concept of founding power.
Okay.
Because to legitimize a massive world-altering institution, whether that's the Roman Empire or the Athenian democracy,
The architect of that society cannot just be a regular person.
no. The civic identity of millions of people relies on the absolute authority of the founder. Therefore, their biography must be retroactively elevated.
They need to be superhuman.
Exactly, but not just in virtue. They have to be capable of a specific type of necessary violence.
Right.
Building a state from nothing requires breaking the old rules. It requires conquest, deception, force, so the myth has to accommodate that darkness.
It masks the gritty, bloody reality of political consolidation under a veneer of divine destiny.
Which is why the symmetry we see between Romulus and Theseus isn't necessarily because history repeated itself perfectly.
It's because the psychological and political needs of a burgeoning empire demand a specific type of origin story.
Precisely. A founder has to be dangerous, divine, and ultimately a tragic sacrifice for the state.
And to understand how you manufacture that kind of divine resume, we have to look at how Theseus was actually brought into the world.
And let me tell you, the history here is just a masterclass in political maneuvering, cryptic prophecies, and massive cover-ups.
Oh, absolutely. So to ground us geographically, we are dealing with the Peloponnesus. That's the large southern peninsula of Greece.
And Attica, which is the region surrounding Athens.
Right. So on his mother's side, Theseus is descended from Pelops, who was arguably the most powerful king in the Peloponnesus.
And Pelops didn't just gain his power through money or armies, he gained it through strategic marriages.
He had a multitude of children, and he married his daughters off to the chief men of the era.
And placed his sons in high places of command. One of those sons was Pythias.
Pythias is the grandfather of Theseus. He's the governor of a small but significant city called Troezen.
And Pythias is famous. The text notes he had the reputation of being the wisest man of his time.
But his wisdom wasn't like abstract philosophy, right?
No, not at all. It consisted of these very grave, highly pragmatic maxims. A surviving example is, unto a friend suffice stipulated prize.
Meaning, even with your friends, get the contract in writing.
Precisely. He is calculating, he understands human nature, and he understands leverage.
So, into his city of Troezen walks a man with a massive problem. Agis, the king of Athens.
And Agis is in a terrifyingly precarious political position back home in Attica.
Right, he's the king, but he has no children. And we have to remember what a lack of an heir means in an ancient monarchy.
It is a profound vulnerability.
Because Agis has 50 nephews.
Judisti.
They are the sons of his brother Pallas, known collectively as the Palantidae. And these 50 nephews are hovering around the throne like vultures.
They despise Agis for being childless. They are constantly mutinying.
They're essentially just waiting for him to die so
Right.
they can carve up the kingdom.
So Agis is desperate. He travels to the Oracle of Delphi to ask the gods how he can secure an heir.
And the oracle, in classic, infuriating Delphi fashion, gives him an incredibly obscure answer.
Right. The priestess explicitly forbids him from the company of any woman until he returns to Athens.
But the phrasing she uses is wild. She says, "Loose not the wineskin foot, thou chief of men, until to Athens thou not come again."
Agis is baffled. Like, what does a wineskin foot have to do with statecraft or conception?
He has absolutely no idea. So on his way home, he stops in Troezen to consult the famous wise man, Pythias. And he tells him the prophecy.
And this is where Pythias executes a brilliant piece of political opportunism.
He really does.
Pythias hears wineskin, understands the implicit metaphor regarding intoxication and conception, and realizes the god is saying Agis is destined to conceive a great heir the very next time he sleeps with a woman.
And Pythias thinks, well, why shouldn't that heir be my grandson?
Exactly. Now, the text notes it's uncertain whether it was by persuasion or outright deceit, but Pythias gets the king of Athens deeply intoxicated.
And arranges for him to sleep with his own daughter, Aethra.
So in one night, Pythias secretly secures his own family's bloodline on the throne of Athens.
But the next morning, the hangover wears off, and Agis realizes exactly what has happened.
He suspects Aethra might be pregnant.
And he is terrified, Not of Pythias, but of his 50 nephews back in Athens.
Right, if the Palantidae find out that Aegis has produced an heir in Trozen, they will send assassins to murder the baby immediately.
The child represents an existential threat to the nephew's power, so Aegis has to act with absolute secrecy.
What does he do?
He takes his royal sword and a pair of sandals. But he doesn't just hand them to Aethra. He finds a massive stone with a hollow in it, hides the tokens inside, and covers them with a rock.
And he gives Aethra very specific instructions.
He says, if you have a boy, raise him in secret. When he becomes a young man, if he is strong enough to lift this stone, he is to take the sword and the shoes and travel to me in Athens.
But no one can know his true identity.
Right, and this creates a massive local problem for Pythias.
Oh, yeah. He now has a pregnant daughter, an illegitimate royal child, and a strict gag order from the king of Athens.
He needs a cover story. A story powerful enough to protect the child from the judgment of the locals, but also terrifying enough to deter any wandering assassins who might get suspicious.
And here comes the ancient PR spin. Pythias just calmly spreads a rumor through the city that the baby's father was actually Neptune, the god of the sea.
It's an incredibly strategic choice of deity, too.
Oh, very much so. In the city of Trozen, Neptune was their tutelary god, their supreme patron deity.
They paid him the highest veneration. I think they even stamped their local currency with his trident, right?
They did. By claiming the child as Neptune's, Pythias takes a potentially scandalous, politically dangerous situation and completely flips the narrative.
He turns a hidden royal bastard into a localized demigod.
It provides an impenetrable layer of prestige, because who is going to question the patron god of the city?
What I love about this is how the myth of Neptune is deliberately constructed to cover the gritty, desperate political reality of King Aegis.
What's fascinating here is how it's a literal cover-up.
Yes. And Theseus grows up under this protective myth. And he doesn't just grow up strong, he grows up incredibly tactical.
The text gives us this hyper-specific detail about his coming of age.
Right.
In this era, it was customary for young men to offer the first clippings of their hair to the god at Delphi. But Theseus only clips the front part of his head.
The author notes this specific haircut became known as the Theseus tonsure.
Right. He shaves the front, but leaves the back.
And the reason he does this is purely martial. He realizes that in brutal, close-quarters, hand-to-hand combat, the first thing an enemy will do is grab you by the hair to control your head.
So if he has no hair in the front, they can't grab him.
The text even points out that centuries later, Alexander the Great used this exact same logic, ordering his Macedonian captains to shave their beards so enemies couldn't grab them in a melee.
From day one, Theseus is thinking like a ruthless tactician.
He really is. He is practical, he is driven, and he is physically exceptional.
So when he finally comes of age, Aethra takes him to the massive stone and reveals the truth of his parentage.
He approaches the rock, and without any real difficulty, he heaves it aside. He claims the sword and the shoes.
His royal identity is confirmed, but now he faces his first true crucible. He has to choose how to get to Athens.
And this choice tells us everything about who he is going to become, because his mother and his grandfather practically beg him to take the sea route.
Right. Sailing across the Saronic Gulf to Athens is relatively safe.
Traveling by land, however, means walking across the isthmus, that narrow strip of land connecting the Peloponnesus to the rest of Greece.
And taking that road is essentially a death sentence.
Because the road to Athens is infested with robbers, murderers, and tyrants.
But we have to be clear about the nature of the threat here. The text goes on this fascinating philosophical tangent to explain that these aren't just desperate highwaymen stealing for food.
No, the author describes this era as producing a sort of men who possessed extraordinary physical gifts, unbelievable strength, swiftness, endurance.
But they were entirely devoid of empathy. They used these natural gifts purely for cruelty.
They rejoiced in insolence and inhumanity.
They operated under a very specific philosophical worldview. Might makes right?
Yeah.
They believed that concepts like justice, equity, and human decency were just artificial constructs.
To them, justice was an excuse invented by weak people who lacked the courage to commit injuries or the physical strength to defend themselves.
If you are strong, you take what you want and you crush anyone who objects.
And for a long time, there was absolutely no one to stop them. The text mentions that Hercules used to patrol these roads and purge the tyrants.
But Hercules had fallen into a personal misfortune and was currently serving as a slave in Lydia.
So with the great hero out of the picture, the villains came out of the woodwork completely unchecked.
Which brings us back to Trozen. Pythias, trying to scare his grandson into taking the boat, gives Theseus an exact, terrifying account of every single monster on the road.
He describes their strength, their specific brands of psychological cruelty, and the horrific ways they kill travelers.
But his grandfather miscalculates.
Big time. Because Theseus has a secret motivation. The text says he was secretly fired by the glory of Hercules.
They were actually cousins, and Theseus was utterly obsessed with him.
The author says Theseus literally couldn't sleep at night because he was so jealous of Hercules' actions.
To Theseus, sneaking away by a safe sea route, hiding from the very villains his cousin used to fight, would be deeply dishonorable.
He wants to prove his royal blood not just by carrying a hidden sword, but by performing noble, undeniable acts of courage.
He wants to earn the throne, so he ignores the warnings and hits the road of blood.
And this road trip is critical for our understanding of ancient morality.
Yeah.
Because we really have to examine how Theseus deals with these villains.
He doesn't just defeat them in combat. He engages in a highly specific, deeply symbolic type of violence known as lex talionis, the law of retaliation.
An eye for an eye.
Right. If we look closely at this section, it's not just a list of monsters he kills, it's a thematic exploration of poetic justice.
He isn't just a law enforcement officer making an arrest. He's like a comic book vigilante, giving them a taste of their own horrific medicine.
He is mirroring their own psychological terror back at them. Let's trace his path.
First, he encounters a man named Procrustes, known as the club bearer. Procrustes stops him and tries to smash him with his massive club.
Theseus overpowers him, beats him to death, and then takes the club.
But he doesn't just use it for the rest of the journey. He adopts it as his permanent signature weapon.
It's a direct parallel to Hercules wearing the impenetrable skin of the Nemean lion he killed.
Theseus carries the club to prove the sheer magnitude of the beast he overpowered. It becomes a symbol of civilization conquering brute force.
Next, he meets a truly terrifying psychological sadist named Sinis, also known as the Bender of Pines.
This guy is awful. He would force travelers to help him bend 2 massive pine trees down to the ground.
Then he would tie the travelers' limbs to both trees and let them snap back, tearing the victim completely apart.
It is a horrifying abuse of natural leverage. So what does Theseus do?
He overpowers Sinis and does the exact same thing to him. He tears the man apart with his own pine trees.
But the aftermath of this kill contains one of the most bizarre, fascinating historical anecdotes in the entire text.
It does. Sinis had a daughter. Her name was Ariadne, and she is completely terrified of Theseus.
She runs away and hides in a thick patch of brushwood and wild asparagus thorn.
And the text gives us this incredibly poignant detail. It says she prayed to the shrubs and the asparagus in a childlike manner.
She begged the plants to give her shelter, and she solemnly promised them that if she survived, she would never cut them down or burn them.
Theseus tracks her down, but he calls out to her, promising not to hurt her.
She eventually comes out, and they form a relationship. They actually end up having a son together named Minotaur.
And generations later, the descendants of this son, a family called the Ioxids living in Cararia, maintain a strict family tradition. They vow never to burn asparagus thorn.
Which is just, it's a perfect example of what historians call etiology, right? The study of origins.
Exactly. To a modern reader, a family refusing to burn a specific thorny weed seems like a bizarre superstition.
But to the ancient mind, myth explains the present. To explain why the Ioxids have this strict botanical taboo, the historians traced their lineage all the way back to the foundational hero of Athens.
Back to a violent highwayman and a terrified girl praying to the bushes. It anchors the epic supernatural myth into the mundane daily life of regular citizens. It makes the history feel tangible.
Yeah. After that, Theseus actively goes hunting. He doesn't just wait to be attacked. He goes out of his way to track down the Cromyonian sow, a creature named Phaia.
And here the author stops the narrative to actively debate his own sources.
Was Phaia a literal monstrous wild beast like a giant demon pig? Because the romantic myth says Theseus wanted to prove that a brave man shouldn't just fight wicked men, but should also actively seek out noble, dangerous beasts.
But then the author presents the alternative historical reality.
Right. Other sources claim that Phaia wasn't an animal at all.
She was a female human robber, a murderer who was simply nicknamed the Sow by the locals because of the sheer foulness of her life and manners.
I love when the text does this. It strips away the magic and shows us the probable history underneath.
But it gets even more complicated when we look at his next target, Sciron.
Oh, Sciron is a fascinating case study in historiographical conflict.
Very much so. In the Athenian version of the story, the version we usually hear, Sciron is a monster.
He lived near the coastal cliffs. He would force travelers to wash his feet on the edge of the precipice, and while they were distracted, he would kick them off the cliff into the sea.
So, following his code of poetic justice, Theseus forces Sciron to the edge and kicks him off the cliff.
But the text points out that not everyone agrees with this version of history.
No, they don't. The writers from the city of Megara, which is where Sciron lived, completely reject this narrative.
They claim it is pure Athenian propaganda.
Right. In the Megarian histories, Sciron wasn't a robber. He was actually a punisher of robbers.
They claim he was a just leader, a relative of good men, and the father-in-law to the incredibly sacred hero Aeacus. Wait, so if I'm understanding this correctly, we have two neighboring cities with completely opposite historical records about the exact same guy.
Yes. And it shows us how fiercely contested these myths were. Because Athens eventually became the dominant cultural and military power in the region, their version of the story, where Sciron is a villain and Theseus is the savior, becomes the accepted mainstream narrative.
But the local Megarians are fighting a rearguard action in the history book, saying, no, he was our local hero and your Athenian founder murdered a good man.
It is ancient political spin doctoring.
Finally, Theseus reaches Procrustes, the man with the infamous bed. This is maybe the most famous of all the highwaymen.
Procrustes would force travelers to lie on his iron bed. If they were too short, he would physically stretch them out until their joints dislocated.
If they were too tall, he would chop off their legs to make them fit. He is the ultimate symbol of forced arbitrary conformity.
And again, Theseus forces Procrustes onto his own bed and subjects him to the exact same torture.
So we have to step back and ask, what is the moral framework here? Is Theseus dispensing justice? Or is he just a stronger, more efficient killer than the bandits?
He's certainly leaving a lot of bodies behind.
He is, but the text explicitly defends his actions.
The author argues that Theseus proceeded in the punishment of evil men who underwent the same violence from him which they had inflicted upon others, justly suffering after the manner of their own injustice.
In the heroic ideals of the era, true justice wasn't a trial by jury. It was the exact reflection of the crime onto the criminal.
The morality is tied to the concept of cosmic balance. Theseus isn't viewed as a murderer. He is the reestablisher of order. He cleanses the highway.
He makes the physical world safe for civilization to take root.
But the terrible irony is that after surviving the deadliest road in Greece, the real danger is waiting for him in the very city he came to save.
It's waiting for him at the dinner table.
Yes. Theseus finally arrives in Athens on the 8th day of the month of Cronius. But the city he walks into is in absolute chaos.
It is deeply divided into political factions, and his father, King Aegeus, is exhausted, deeply paranoid, and completely unaware that his son has survived the journey.
Furthermore, the king's court has been compromised. A very dangerous woman has embedded herself in the palace.
Medea, the famous, terrifying sorceress.
She had fled from the city of Corinth after her disastrous marriage to Jason of the Argonauts.
And she essentially shows up in Athens, finds a paranoid, aging, childless king, and promises to use her dark arts and drugs to cure his infertility and give him children.
She has completely taken over the king's ear.
Medea is a master manipulator, and when this young, incredibly strong, famous stranger walks into the city, Medea recognizes exactly who he is.
She knows this is Aegeus' son from Troezen, but Aegeus has no idea.
Medea instantly realizes that if the king acknowledges this powerful young hero, her own influence over the throne will vanish.
So she uses the king's own fear against him. She plays on Aegeus' paranoia about the mutinous factions in the city.
She convinces the king that this popular young stranger is a threat, a usurper trying to win over the mob.
She convinces a father to invite his own son to a banquet and poison his cup.
It is a moment of supreme dramatic tension. The hero survives the bender of pines and the cliff kicker, only to be handed a cup of fatal poison by his own father.
The banquet begins. The meat is served on the table. But Theseus, ever the tactician, doesn't just stand up and announce his identity.
Right, he wants to prove it undeniably, so instead of using a regular knife to cut his meat, he draws the massive royal sword he retrieved from under the rock.
The moment the blade catches the light, Aegeus sees it. He instantly recognizes his own weapon, the token he left in Troezen 20 years ago.
Aegeus lunges forward and violently knocks the cup of poison to the floor before Theseus can drink it.
He embraces him, weeping, and immediately calls an assembly of the citizens to publicly acknowledge Theseus as his true heir.
And the common citizens are thrilled. They receive him gladly because they've already heard the rumors of the incredible things he did on the road. They love him.
But this public acknowledgement is the match that ignites a powder keg. Because who is watching this whole scene unfold?
The 50 nephews. The Palantidae.
The nephews are absolutely furious. They've spent years waiting for their childless uncle to die so they can legally inherit the kingdom.
And now, suddenly, Aegis pulls an adopted, foreign-born son out of nowhere and names him the successor. To the Palantidae, this is a coup.
They declare open war on the throne.
They decide to strike immediately. They split their massive forces. One group marches openly against the city from the front, while the other group hides in an ambush, planning to attack the city from the rear once the fighting starts.
It's a solid military pincer movement.
It would have worked, except they are betrayed from within. A herald from the township of Agnes, a man named Leos, discovers the design of the ambush.
He sneaks away and warns Theseus.
And Theseus doesn't hesitate. He doesn't wait for the open attack. He immediately marches his forces out, surrounds the group hiding in ambush, and slaughters them all.
The main force, hearing that their trap has failed, instantly panics, collapses, and scatters. The rebellion is crushed in a single day.
And once again, the text gives us a truly amazing, hyper-local historical detail about the aftermath of this betrayal.
Because the herald Leos was from the township of Agnes, and the ambush happened near the township of Pallene, the survivors developed a lasting, multi-generational cultural grudge.
It's a fascinating sociological phenomenon. The people of Pallene refused to ever intermarry with the people of Agnes.
But it went deeper than that. In ancient Greece, heralds would normally begin public proclamations with the standard opening phrase, "Hear ye people," which in Greek sounds like "akoitelioi."
But the heralds of Pallene forever banned the use of that phrase because they absolutely hated the very sound of the name Leos.
It's incredible. Grudges formed over ancient political betrayals are literally encoded into their local linguistics and marriage customs for centuries.
So, Theseus crushes the rebellion. He has secured the physical seize of the throne, but he is a deeply methodical thinker.
Right. He knows that military victory isn't enough to secure long-term power. He needs to win the hearts of the common people.
He needs to transition from a warrior to a protector. He needs a massive public spectacle.
So he decides to handle a local terror. He leaves Athens and tracks down the Marathonian bull.
This was a massive, destructive beast that had been ravaging the local countryside, destroying crops, and terrifying the farmers.
Theseus doesn't just kill it in the woods. He captures the enormous animal alive.
He drags it all the way back to Athens and parades it in triumph through the streets of the city, letting everyone see that he has neutralized the threat.
And then he publicly sacrifices it to the god Apollo. It is pure, calculated statesmanship.
You pointed out how methodical Theseus is. He survives a poisoning, crushes a rebellion through military intelligence, and then does a massive public spectacle with the bull to win the hearts of the people.
He is proving to the populace that he is not just a killer of men, but a protector of the people.
And there's a really sweet, humanizing story tucked into the margins of this bull hunt. While he was out tracking the beast, he was caught in a storm and took shelter in the humble hut of a very old woman named Hecale.
She took him in, fed him, and treated him with incredible kindness. The text says she treated him like a child, calling him by endearing diminutives the way grandmothers do.
She even vowed to the god Jupiter that she would offer a special sacrifice if the young hero returned safely from the hunt. But tragically, she passed away before Theseus got back.
When Theseus finds out, he doesn't just forget about her. He commands that all the surrounding townships must honor her memory forever.
He institutes an annual sacrifice called the Hecalesia, specifically to honor her hospitality.
It shows the citizens that their new prince values the common people, respects hospitality, and remembers those who help him.
It is a brilliant piece of image building. But his greatest PR challenge, and the defining legend of his entire life, the story that will echo through millennia, is about to arrive by ship from the island of Crete.
This brings us to the Minotaur. And the true history hidden beneath this myth is absolutely mind-blowing.
The text sets the scene. For the third time, the collectors of the terrible tribute from Crete have arrived in Athens.
To understand the tribute, we need the political context. Years prior, the son of King Minos of Crete, a man named Androgeus, had been treacherously murdered while traveling in Attica.
Minos was outraged. He waged a brutal, perpetual war against Athens, and the gods supposedly cursed Athens with famine and pestilence.
To appease Minos and end the suffering, the Athenians agreed to a horrifying treaty. Every 9 years, they would send a tribute of 7 young men and 7 virgins to Crete.
Now, this is where we have to critically evaluate our sources, because our author completely deconstructs the famous myth. Everyone knows the poetic version of this story.
The myth tells us that these 14 Athenian youths were thrown into an inescapable, maddening labyrinth,
Where they were hunted and devoured by the Minotaur, a literal monster with the muscular body of a man and the terrifying head of a bull.
Right, that is the fable. But then the author brings in the historical reality. He cites ancient historians, including Philochorus and Aristotle, who studied the actual records.
And they argue that the labyrinth wasn't a magical puzzle. It was just an ordinary, well-designed prison intended to hold captives securely so they couldn't run away.
And the youths were certainly not fed to a mythological beast. They were given away as prizes in funeral games that King Minos held in honor of his murdered son, Androgeus.
And who won these games? The victor, the man who claimed the Athenian youths as his personal slaves, was a general in Minos' army.
And his name was Taurus. He was a cruel, arrogant man who treated his captives with horrific brutality.
A general named Taurus, not a literal bull.
Exactly. And here is where we see the terrifying, world-altering power of the playwrights.
Oh, this is fascinating.
The text points out that historically, King Minos of Crete was actually a highly respected king. He was a visionary lawgiver. He even had a famous judge named Rhadamanthus working under him.
But Minos made one colossal, unforgivable mistake. He went to war with Athens.
Yes, and the text contains this incredibly profound observation. The author writes, "This may show us how dangerous a thing it is to incur the hostility of a city that is mistress of eloquence and song."
If you look at older texts, like the poems of Homer and Hesiod, they actually praised Minos.
But the Athenian tragedians, the playwrights, got the better of him. From the vantage point of the theater stage, they showered Minos with obloquy, representing him to the masses as a tyrant of ultimate cruelty and violence.
So if you fight a city full of writers and theater kids, they will literally turn you into a monster in the history books.
Exactly. If we were to put this into a modern context, it's like a hostile corporate takeover. Athens couldn't defeat King Minos militarily at the time, so they decided to destroy his legacy culturally.
They took a harsh political treaty and a mean general named Taurus, and they spun it into a literal half-man, half-bull demon living in a nightmare maze.
They performed this play over and over until the public forgot the truth. That is ancient propaganda at its absolute finest.
It is the ultimate manipulation of public image. They weaponized myth to demonize their geopolitical rival.
So, back in Athens, the time for the terrible lottery arrives. The parents of Athens are furious.
They are watching their children being lined up to be sent away as slaves to this general, Taurus, and they look at King Aegeus with deep resentment.
He is the one who caused this misery, but his new foreign-born son is exempt from the deadly lottery.
Theseus sees this civic unrest, and showing an incredible grasp of leadership and noble character, he steps forward and volunteers to go to Crete as part of the tribute without drawing a lot.
The entire city is struck with admiration. Even Aegeus, terrified of losing his newly found heir, begs him not to go.
But Theseus is completely inflexible. He binds his fate to the fate of the common people.
Before they leave, there is a crucial agreement about the ship's sail. Normally, the tribute ship sailed with a blank sail, signaling the unavoidable death and destruction of the passengers.
But Theseus tells the pilot that if he manages to survive and defeat the threat in Crete, he must change the sail to a white one on the return journey.
It's a binary signal. Black for death, white for life. Though the author notes that one source, the poet Simonides, claims it wasn't a white sail but a scarlet one, dyed with the juice of the inner wood of a living oak tree.
Regardless of the color, it was designed to be seen from miles away by the anxious king waiting on the cliffs.
Armed with this plan and a ton of confidence, Theseus heads to Crete. And the moment his ship hits the shore, the historical record completely shatters into multiple conflicting timelines.
It truly does. We all know the standard poetic myth. King Minos' daughter, Ariadne, sees Theseus, falls desperately in love with him, and gives him a ball of thread to navigate the dark turns of the labyrinth.
He kills the Minotaur, rolls up the thread, and escapes with her in the dead of night.
But the alternative histories our author presents are so much more fascinating. Philochorus, the historian, claims that when Theseus arrived, he demanded to fight the cruel general Taurus in a wrestling match during the funeral games.
Minos and Ariadne were sitting in the crowd watching. And the twist here is that King Minos actually hated Taurus.
The general had grown too powerful, too arrogant, and was suspected of sleeping with the queen.
So when Theseus stepped into the ring and completely humiliated Taurus in front of the entire island, Minos was thrilled.
He was so pleased to see his rival crushed that he voluntarily freed the captives and formally forgave the tribute.
And then there's another historian, Clydemus, who completely rejects the wrestling match theory and claims there was a massive, bloody naval battle.
According to him, Theseus didn't go as a captive. He secretly built a fleet of ships, sneaked into the port of Crete, engaged the military, killed Minos' son Deucalion in open battle, and then negotiated a peace treaty with Ariadne, who had inherited the government.
The historiographical disorder here is total. The author is openly presenting the reader with the fact that nobody truly knows what happened on that island.
The only verified historical fact is that Theseus went to Crete, and he returned victorious, ending the tribute.
And the confusion only deepens when we try to figure out what happened to Ariadne. Her fate is the most heavily contested part of the entire narrative. The text admits that there are countless inconsistent traditions.
Some sources say she was so devastated when Theseus deserted her on an island that she hung herself.
Others claim she was carried away by sailors to the island of Naxos, where she lived happily and married a priest of the god Bacchus.
Some writers claim Theseus dumped her simply because he fell in love with another woman named Eagle.
And regarding that specific claim about another woman, there's a fascinating footnote about political censorship.
Oh, this part is crazy.
Supposedly, the legendary poet Hesiod actually wrote a line condemning Theseus for abandoning Ariadne for another lover. But centuries later, when the tyrant Pisistratus was ruling Athens, he actively censored the poem and had that line removed to protect Theseus's public relations.
You cannot have the founding hero of your city acting dishonorably in the sacred text. It's ancient redacting.
And then there is the incredibly detailed Amethusian account coming from the people of Cyprus.
They claim Ariadne was pregnant and suffering from terrible seasickness. Theseus put her on shore to rest, but a sudden storm blew his ship back out to sea. He couldn't get back to her.
The local women of Cyprus took care of Ariadne. They felt so bad for her that they even forged kind letters pretending they were from Theseus to comfort her.
But she tragically died in childbirth before he could return.
And when Theseus finally made it back, he was heartbroken. The Cypriots claim he left a massive sum of money to the locals to offer annual sacrifices in her honor, and he ordered 2 small statues made of her, one of silver and one of brass.
They even developed a ritual for her festival where a young man lies down and mimics the cries and pains of a woman in childbirth.
And if that isn't confusing enough, some historians argue that there were actually 2 different Ariadnes in history.
One who was joyful and married Bacchus, and one from a later era who was taken by Theseus and mourned.
What this incredible divergence shows us is the economic and cultural value of myth. Every island, every port city in the Aegean Sea wanted a piece of the Theseus narrative.
They altered the story to validate their own local festivals, their own statues, and their own local grave sites.
If you had an ancient tomb on your island claiming it belonged to the tragic Ariadne, immediately elevated your city's prestige.
It's the ancient equivalent of tourist traps claiming George Washington slept here. But eventually, Theseus has to head home to Athens.
On the way back, he stops at the island of Delos. He and the rescued youths perform this intricate, highly specific dance called the crane dance.
The text describes it as consisting of measured turnings and returnings, physically imitating the confusing twists and turns of the labyrinth they had just escaped.
But as they finally approach the coast of Attica, the return journey ends in sudden, devastating tragedy.
In their immense joy and excitement of seeing their homeland, both Theseus and the pilot completely forget their most important instruction. They forget to lower the black sail and hoist the white one.
King Aegeus is waiting on a high, rocky cliff, scanning the horizon. He sees the ship approaching. He sees the black sail.
Believing his son has been torn apart by the monster, he is consumed by total despair, and he throws himself off the cliff into the sea, which is why it is called the Aegean Sea to this day.
Meanwhile, Theseus docks the ship, completely unaware of what has happened. He begins performing sacrifices of thanksgiving on the beach and sends a herald ahead to the city to announce the good news of their survival.
But the herald walks into a city that is weeping.
And this tragic miscommunication leads directly to the origins of the Oskophoria festival. The text explains exactly why this festival looks the way it does.
The herald, returning to the beach, refuses to wear his garland of joy. Instead, out of respect for the dead king, he hangs the garland on his staff.
And during the libations, the people cry out these confusing shouts, "Ilalu, ayuyu." One sound is a cheer of triumph for the saved youths, but the other is a cry of consternation and disorder of mind.
It perfectly, physically captures that exact historical moment of mingled joy and profound grief. They also boil a common pot of pulse, a type of stew during the festival, specifically remembering how the youths pool all their remaining rations together into a single pot when they finally reach safety.
And there's one more amazing detail about the tribute. Remember how it was supposed to be 7 young men and 7 virgins?
Well, before they left Athens, Theseus had sneakily swapped out 2 of the girls for 2 teenage boys who had fair faces.
He kept them completely out of the sun, taught them how to walk and talk and dress exactly like the girls, and snuck them into the group to protect the real girls.
So during this festival, 2 youths lead a procession dressed in those exact same feminine habits, carrying vine branches.
As we discussed earlier, these rituals act as living, breathing history books for a society that didn't have widespread literacy.
By boiling the pulse, by shouting those specific conflicting cries, by performing the complicated crane dance, they are anchoring the myth into their physical reality.
It ensures the society never forgets the price of their deliverance.
But with his father gone, the dancing stops. Theseus inherits a deeply fractured, fragile land. This is where he transitions from a monster hunter to a true statesman.
And this is exactly where the concept of founding power dramatically differs between Romulus and Theseus.
If we look at Romulus, his founding power was physical and martial. He built the physical walls of Rome from the ground up, and he populated it by taking in outcasts and runaways.
But Theseus's great and wonderful design is entirely different. He doesn't build a new city. He takes an existing, scattered people who are living in distinct, constantly warring townships spread all across Attica, and he decides to unite them into one massive political entity.
And the crazy part is, he doesn't conquer them by force. He could have used his army to crush every local mayor-in-chief, but he doesn't.
He travels from township to township, from tribe to tribe, and he uses persuasion. He uses diplomacy.
He promises them something no one had ever promised before: a commonwealth without a monarchy.
He tells the local leaders that if they agree to unite, he will voluntarily lay down his absolute regal power. He promises to keep only the role of war commander and protector of the laws. He offers them a democracy.
It is a radical, almost unthinkable historical first. The text notes that even Aristotle himself highlighted this, writing that Theseus was the first leader out of an inclination to popular government, to willingly part with regal power.
True founding power in the Athenian context isn't just martial strength. It's the visionary ability to forge a shared civic identity through a constitution.
And his administrative execution is brilliant. He dissolves all the separate local council halls and builds one common state house for everyone.
He officially names the whole unified state Athens. To cement this new shared identity, he institutes a massive festival called the Panathenea, the sacrifice of all the united Athenians.
But he also realizes that a society needs structure to survive. So he divides the populace into 3 distinct ranks: noblemen, husbandmen, which are the farmers, and artificers, the craftsmen and merchants.
And meet the delicate balance of power he constructs here. He doesn't just give all the power to the rich.
He gives the noblemen the care of religion, the choice of magistrates, and the dispensing of laws. The text says they excel in honor.
But the husbandmen excel in profit, controlling the food and land, and the artificers excel in sheer numbers. He creates a dynamic, interdependent equilibrium among the ranks.
He is literally inventing the concept of checks and balances. He even mints the first official money stamped with the image of an ox to standardize trade.
He travels to the isthmus and erects a massive boundary pillar, writing on one side, Peloponnesus here, and on the other, Ionia there, officially defining the borders of his new empire.
And just to show that Athens is now a major cultural player, he institutes the Isthmian Games in honor of Neptune, directly emulating his hero Hercules, who started the Olympic Games.
We're watching a man move from being a mythic, violent hero into a sophisticated historical administrator. He is setting up the administrative, cultural, and economic infrastructure of an empire that will shape the Western world.
But, as with almost all great figures in ancient history, even the most brilliant statesman can succumb to hubris. And for Theseus, as he grows older and more powerful, that hubris takes the form of a deeply ingrained entitlement.
Specifically regarding the treatment of foreign women as prizes, which leads us to the turning of the tide, the Amazons.
The expedition to the Euxine Sea, what we now call the Black Sea, this was essentially the absolute edge of the known world for the Greeks.
Depending on which historian you read, Theseus either went on this expedition alongside Hercules or he commanded his own fleet. But the result is always the same. He captures the Amazon warrior, Antiope.
And the way he captures her is incredibly dishonorable. The text says that when his ship arrived, the Amazons weren't hostile at all. They were actually friendly.
They sent presents down to his ship. Theseus invites Antiope to come on board to view the ship, and the second she steps foot on the deck, he pulls the anchor, sets sail, and kidnaps her.
And this treacherous voyage is immediately marked by tragedy, specifically the tragedy of Saloon. 3 brothers were accompanying Theseus on this voyage.
One of them, a young man named Saloon, falls desperately, obsessively in love with the captive Antiope. She gently but firmly rejects his advances.
Consumed by despair, Saloon throws himself into a river and drowns.
Theseus is grief-stricken. Remembering an old oracle he received at Delphi, he stops the fleet, founds a new city right there on the banks, names it Pythopolis, and names the river after Saloon, leaving the other brothers behind to govern it.
It's a sad story, but Theseus keeps Antiope and sails back to Athens. But you cannot simply kidnap a high-ranking Amazon and expect no geopolitical consequences.
The Amazons retaliate. They invade Attica.
And this is where the text heavily struggles to rationalize the epic myth with geographical reality. The ancient historian Hellanicus claims that the Amazons marched all the way from the Black Sea, crossed the frozen Cimmerian Bosphorus on foot, and marched down into Greece.
Our author Plutarch finds this logistically impossible for an army of women to accomplish. But what he cannot deny is the physical evidence left behind in his own city.
Because the Amazons didn't just attack the borders of Attica. They marched all the way to Athens, breached the walls, and encamped inside the very city itself.
Yes, they fought a massive, brutal 4-month war in the very streets of Athens. The text cites undeniable local landmarks as proof. There was a monument called the Amazonium.
There were specific ancient graves of warrior women who fell in battle located right next to the Manox, the hill where the Democratic Assembly met, and the Museum Hill.
The war was devastating, and it finally only ends when the captive women themselves mediate a peace treaty between the two armies.
Now, looking at this objectively, it is highly likely that Athens fought a brutal war against a localized neighboring enemy.
But because the city was left with these massive, ancient grave sites scattered around their civic centers, they needed a story grand enough to explain them.
An impossible war with mythical warrior women from the edge of the map perfectly serves that psychological need, cementing the heroic defense of the city.
It validates their survival. But the Amazon War was a terrifyingly close call for the new democracy, and yet Theseus does not learn his lesson.
As he ages, his entitlement only metastasizes, leading to a truly dark turn in his character. These are the actions that the ancient Athenian playwrights actively tried to cover up and keep off the theater stage because they ruin the image of the noble founder.
The text is unsparing here. It explicitly lists out the unhonorable traditions that the PR machine tried to hide, ravishing the daughters of the men he killed on the road, deserting Ariadne.
And finally, the ultimate crime, the kidnapping of Helen of Troy.
Yes, that Helen, the face that would eventually launch 1,000 ships. At this point, Theseus is 50 years old. He has a new best friend named Pirithous.
And the way they met is hilarious. Pirithous tried to steal Theseus's cows, they squared off to fight, but they respected each other's sheer swagger so much that they dropped their weapons and swore a blood oath of friendship right there in the dirt.
A very toxic friendship, as it turns out, because they make a pact that they are going to help each other secure daughters of the gods for wives.
So the two 50-year-old men travel to Sparta, they sneak into a temple of Diana, and they see Helen dancing. At this point, she is entirely too young to be married. But they kidnap her anyway.
They flee from the Spartan pursuers, draw lots to see who gets to keep her, and Theseus wins. He hides the young girl away in a secret town under the guard of his mother, Aethra.
But the pact was mutually assured kidnapping. Theseus got his wife, so now Pirithous demands his. And Pirithous says he wants the daughter of the king of the Molossians.
This section of the text is essentially describing an underworld heist, thinly veiled as a historical expedition. The king of the Molossians is literally named Pluto. His wife is named Proserpina.
And he guards his daughter with a giant vicious dog named Cerberus. The rule is, if you want to marry his daughter, you have to fight the dog.
But King Pluto isn't stupid. He figures out very quickly that these two aging warriors aren't there to court his daughter honorably, they're there to steal her. So he seizes them.
He throws Pirithous to the giant dog to be ripped apart, and he locks the great Theseus in a deep, dark prison.
And this is where the consequences of hubris finally catch up to him. Because while the great founder of democracy is rotting in a foreign prison due to his own criminal entitlement, The city he built completely falls apart.
A power vacuum opens in Athens, and into that vacuum steps a man named Mnestheus. The text points out that Mnestheus is the first man in recorded history to have affected popularity with the multitude.
He is the original populist demagogue, and he goes to work dismantling Theseus's legacy.
Mnestheus uses classic class warfare tactics. He goes to the nobility and whispers in their ears saying, Theseus robbed you of your local lordships. He stripped you of your power.
Then he goes to the common people and tells them, you are deluded by a dream of liberty. You think you live in a democracy, but you are actually being lorded over by a newcomer, a foreign-born stranger who kidnaps women and abandons you.
He completely destroys the civic unity Theseus spent his life building. And Mnestheus gets outside help. Because remember, Helen,
her incredibly dangerous divine brothers, Castor and Pollux, invade Attica with a massive army to get their sister back.
And the people of Athens are terrified. But a local citizen named Academus betrays Theseus' secret and reveals exactly where Helen is hidden.
Castor and Pollux march on the town, but surprisingly, they act with extreme discipline. They don't burn Athens to the ground, they just demand their sister back, and then they politely ask to be initiated into the local religious mysteries.
They are so peaceful and disciplined that the Athenians honor them as gods, calling them the Anarches.
Meanwhile, Hercules happens to be passing through the Molossian kingdom. He hears that his cousin Theseus is locked in the dungeon.
Hercules begs King Pluto to release him, and the king agrees purely as a favor to Hercules. So Theseus is freed. He sails back to Athens, expecting to walk into the state house and resume his command as the beloved founder.
But the city has fundamentally changed. The people don't want a commander anymore. The text specifically notes that the citizens expected to be flattered into their duty.
Mnestheus has poisoned the well. Theseus tries to reassert his authority, but he is completely overpowered by the political factions.
Defeated, humiliated, and realizing his era is over, Theseus formally curses the people of Athens. He stands at a location that is literally known forever after as the place of cursing, and he sails into permanent exile.
He heads to the rocky island of Scyros.
He chooses Scyros because he believes he has friends there, or at least inherited lands from his father's side that he can retire to. But the king of Scyros, a man named Lycomedes, views this famous, powerful exile as a massive threat.
Lycomedes is either deeply jealous of Theseus' fame, or he has struck a secret alliance with the demagogue Mnestheus back in Athens.
So King Lycomedes takes the old hero for a walk. He leads him up to the highest cliff on the island, pretending to point out the borders of the lands he is going to give them.
And when Theseus is looking out at the horizon, Lycomedes shoves him. He pushes the great founder of Athens headlong down the rocks to his death.
And nobody in Athens cares. The text notes that Mnestheus rules quietly as king, and Theseus is essentially forgotten by the people who overthrew him.
Let's just pause and absorb that. The man who voluntarily gave up his regal power to found their democracy, who united their city, who fought off terrifying monsters on the road and literal armies in their streets, is overthrown by a sweet-talking demagogue, tossed off a cliff by a minor island king, and his citizens just shrug and move on.
Yes, and it brilliantly highlights the specific parallel to Romulus that the author established at the very beginning of the text. Both men died in great odium with their countrymen.
It reveals a dark truth about society. Often, a civilization simply cannot tolerate the overwhelming power, the violence, and the disruptive presence of their legendary founders in real life.
They are too dangerous, too destabilizing to live alongside. But, and this is the key to founding power, the society desperately needs those same figures as symbols once they are safely dead.
Because they need a unifying myth to survive the future, which is exactly what happens. Centuries later, during the existential crisis of the Persian Wars, at the horrific Battle of Marathon, numerous Athenian soldiers swear they saw a terrifying apparition.
They claim they saw the ghost of Theseus, dressed in full bronze armor, rushing at the head of their lines, slaughtering the invading barbarians.
It is posthumous redemption. Once the threat of his actual physical tyranny is gone, he returns as the ultimate guardian spirit of the state.
After the war, the Oracle of Delphi officially commands Athens to retrieve his bones and give him a burial worthy of a founder.
So the Athenian general Cimon conquers the island of Scyros. But nobody knows where the grave is. Suddenly, Cimon sees an eagle violently tearing at a mound of earth with its talons.
He takes it as a divine sign. They dig there, and they find a massive coffin containing a skeleton of more than ordinary size, lying next to a bronze spearhead and a sword.
They bring the bones back to Athens with massive joyous processions and lavish sacrifices, treating the skeleton as if Theseus himself was returning alive in triumph. It's the ultimate final PR spin to cap off the epic. They physically reclaim their founder, stripping away the memory of his exile and his tyranny and reinstating him as the eternal patron of the city.
But there is a final, highly resonant image of his legacy that the text leaves us with, one that speaks volumes about how history is constructed.
Yes, they built him a magnificent tomb right in the middle of the city. And that tomb didn't just serve as a monument, it became a legally protected sanctuary.
It became a refuge for runaway slaves and for all those of mean condition who were terrified and fleeing from the cruel persecution of men in power.
That is the ultimate paradox of his legacy. I really want you, the listener, to consider the profound irony of that final image.
If you look at the unfiltered history, this is a man who spent his final years acting like an entitled tyrant.
He kidnapped innocent women, he abused his immense power, and he died deeply hated by his own citizens.
And yet, he is remembered by history and by the very architectural structure of the city he built as the ultimate protector of the distressed.
It leaves us with a fascinating question to ponder. When we look back at the origins of our own societies, do we construct the historical heroes we actually had, or do we construct the heroes we desperately need to survive the present?